I know. I noticed a couple of the interviews just watching the film, and you're aiming towards windows with a world outside. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, they must have really been confident that this was going to end before the sun went down. but maybe not. I don't know. Talk to us about that challenge, because I think we can all relate to that. When you are doing real, anything in a real environment, you're bound to the sun, and it does what it wants.
I have always felt that the best looking interviews incorporate natural light from the space.
Yeah.
Early on when I was working as I came up through the lighting department. Early on when I'd work with DPs that would come in the room, close the curtains, close the windows, and then light it all with a million lights. I'd never resonated with that look. And so I've always taken what is sometimes the more risky, but much more visually rewarding approach, which is you've got to incorporate windows and natural light if they're in the space.
But how do you do that over the course of 5 hours? I mean,
Well, what you do is you light for the night and you light for the day, and you have both sets of instruments. So we had a plan, and we had lit for day and night in the same setup.
Wow.
And it just meant that we had to tweak lights as we went. And that meant, so that was a lot of reason why the sky panel was great, because you could bring the sky panel down infinitely as you went, so that you had a key that could handle the full day, full sun, and you could come all the way down to night. And then we'd add practical lights would come into the scene, or we just leave the practical lights on and you wouldn't even see them until they started to appear out of the daylight.
Sure.
Then we had window patterns. One of the sets, we had Joe Licos outside the windows, coming in the windows that would get turned on as it got dark. Because we knew that the floor would be dead if there was no light coming in the windows. And so we ended up putting pattern lights outside that were turned off in the daylight. And then as the sun started to set, we started to bring those lights online and started to dim them up so that you wouldn't, and we editorially, we knew that we were never going to be intercutting between daylight and night. We were going to be going all over the place. So you were never worried. And this is true of most documentaries. There's the fear that, the daytime shot is going to look so different than the nighttime shot. And very few interviews, very few documentaries that I've worked on where you really get pinned against a wall and you're throwing your audience by having a daylight shot of the subject and a nighttime shot of the subject. It just doesn't really make a difference, because you're usually going off to a lot of other visual stuff and then coming back. And so you're not remembering that you saw that person in the daylight and now you're seeing them at night.
Yeah.
Whereas a narrative film, you would absolutely notice that, because it would throw the story a little bit.
So you got a little bit of flexibility there, which is good. But I'm curious, can you point our audience to one of your setups that you did have day filming and night filming in the same scene? Like, are any of your setups right now, any of the interviews that you did, incorporate both?
Yeah. So Shoshana Zuberoff was started in the day, and then a 5-hour interview that ended in night.
Wow.
And so it moves. You see it move and change. And for that interview, I was running around changing out ND filters. Like, we'd do a question, and in the real transitional times, I would go to A camera, swap the ND, then do a question, then go to B camera, swap the ND, then go to do a question, then C camera, swap the ND, and then D camera, and then sometimes 2, or sometimes the AC would swap, and boom, 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 and you're just doing that. And meanwhile, I'm changing NDs out, or the AC and I are changing NDs out. The gaffer is changing out lighting. Sometimes if we tried to key with sky panels whenever we knew it was going to be a changing light, so that we could vary the key very subtly with dimming. Obviously, Joe Licos are HMIs, so you had to do that with scrims, with hard scrims.
So you were just kind of breaking along the way, giving time to make those adjustments.
Yeah, not very long. very short breaks.
Yeah, because you really can't. I mean, you don't want to break the flow of the interview. You don't want to, break the energy at all.
Yeah, I mean, and it also takes a long time to get up and rolling 6 cameras.
Yeah.
So, as a documentary filmmaker, I'm really impatient when it takes a long time to roll and mark all the cameras.
Yeah.
It's first of all, it's a massive amount of data you're wasting. Marker A. Okay, marker C. Did you get that? Okay, marker D. No, did you get marker B? No, okay, common mark. And that just takes a long time. And if you don't do that quickly, you've wasted $1,000 on markers, in hard drive space. And you got to process all that footage. And then that goes up off the charts as well. So you really have to, I usually will, for something like that, insist that every camera is getting time code. And so we did do that. And eventually what we did is we just would bump a slate at the beginning of the interview and just let it go and give up on actually marker. Make sure there was always scratch audio and time code going to every camera. So you had a primary and a backup for syncing.
Sure.
And that way you didn't have to deal with that. But a lot of times for those setups where we had light changes happening, we would only stop down depending on the compression on the reds. Those were usually our shortest loads. We would stagger when we started and stopped cameras. So the Dragons and the FS7s would all roll and the Monstro, and then we'd stop at a half hour and change out the Monstro, leave everything else rolling, and then roll through and then do an overall change out. And during those overall change outs, those roll changes, I could make the biggest lighting changes. Yep. Sometimes, like on Shoshana's interview, I just went, while we're rolling, ran over right as the director's asking the question and swapped an ND. And I would
so you've got to be like a ninja on set, running around like unbelievable.
Yeah.